What's going on, everybody? This is the Oregon Football Report. I'm your host, Will Ortner. And despite having a really rough night last night and honestly having a really rough day that made me question all kinds of things with the Oregon Ducks, I have fortunately been able to kind of weather the storm, and I hope that you are able to weather the storm as well and realize that the sun is going to come up tomorrow. Shout out to Annie. And that this Oregon football team, we have to look at what could be happening now in the future because we have to move on to 2026 and how that season is going to end up and how that season can end up for the Oregon Ducks. And more importantly, now that the season is over, who are the players that the Ducks are really targeting in the transfer portal? Because it is that season. I think that Oregon is right frickin' there, and I still believe that Dan Lanning is the guy that's going to get Oregon over the top and finally get that national title. Every year he improves. Every freaking year the guy improves, and most of his big losses, well, they go on to end up winning the national championship. He had a big loss to Ohio State. Ohio State won the Natty. Had a big loss to Georgia. Georgia won the Natty. I think that Indiana is going to win the Natty, and I know that it's frustrating. I know that it feels like we're far. We're not that far from being a national championship team. And in fact, I think some of the transfer portal recruits could end up being a big deal for Oregon next year and help put them back over the top. We know how good that team could potentially be if everyone comes back. I think that a couple of these guys could be some key additions, not just for next year, but for some years moving forward. Make sure that you hit that like button on today's video. Let's get 2026 back onto the right track. All right, I have three players that I want to talk about today that have been linked, and one player, in fact, is actually in Eugene. He was in Eugene on Friday. Spent some time over there today, and that's actually where we're going to start, but then we'll get into the two quarterbacks that I want to talk about and how actually them coming over to Oregon might not be affected by Dante Moore's decision on whether to come back to Eugene or to enter into the 2026 NFL draft. But first to that cornerback, and that, of course, is Utah cornerback Smith Snowden. Snowden has been a fantastic player over at Utah. Now, there's a lot of rumors. In fact, he's gone on and visited Michigan. His old head coach, Kyle Whittingham, he is now the head coach over at the Michigan Wolverines. He'd be an easy slide-in addition for them where they have some needs at that defensive back position, and he would for sure make them stronger. But Max Torres of On3 did have this to say in a recent article about Smith Snowden and the possibility that he ends up at Oregon. Snowden visited Michigan on Wednesday and will now visit Notre Dame on Thursday. His camp chose to cancel a Georgia visit. That was originally supposed to be on Thursday. I do think that is important news. And then now the former Ute will fly to Oregon Friday night for his visit with the Ducks. That'll likely begin on Saturday and carry over into Sunday, given the fact that the Ducks play Indiana on Friday. So he should be down in Eugene. And then Max did have this to say, a decision should come shortly after that trip. So there is something to be said about the Ducks being the last voice that Snowden is going to end up hearing. And I do think that is important. I think that when you look at this defensive back room for the Ducks, I think that if he was fantastic this year, although there's clear growth that needs to be made, Finney is maybe the best young corner that I've seen in my time watching the Oregon Ducks. I'm sure there's going to be some people that come at me and say, hey, well, what about Cliff Harris or what about X player? And to those guys, I apologize. Maybe recency bias kind of is, I'm buying too much into that. And as much talent as there is at that Oregon secondary, remember that a lot of players on the defense that hit the transfer portal, they were either cornerbacks or they were safeties for this Oregon football team. And a lot of those guys were corners. So it would be important for the Ducks to add another veteran presence, a guy who has proven that he can do it at the highest levels. If you're playing defensive football over at Utah, you're a pretty damn good football player. And the fact that Kyle Whittingham is trying to bring him in over to Michigan, that's huge as well. Now, right now, when you look at On3 and you look at some of the 24/7 stuff, it does seem like Smith Snowden is expected to end up over at Michigan with his former head coach. But it is very important that the Ducks get the last laugh here and they get the final word. How often have we in our own lives gone with a decision that we didn't necessarily go into a process of making a decision because we heard the final word and that was the word that stuck out to us most? I did a poor job of explaining that, but the way that I would explain it is I remember when I went through my recruitment. Now, I went through recruitment at a D2 level in a time where there was no NIL money and that had no effect on it. But I could have told you right now, I was expecting to go to school A. They were my first visit. I was most excited to go and talk to them and talk to their coaching staff. I had spent a ton of time over there with them. And then I had school B where I was like, I'm just going to do my due diligence, make sure that I go through all of my options. They reached out to me. I enjoyed them. I enjoyed their time. And I'll just go check out the school. And then after checking out the school and kind of talking with the coaches, I fell in love. I fell in love with the school. I fell in love with the coaching staff, and I ended up at school B. Oregon has the opportunity to do that with Smith Snowden. You know what you have to do to get him to commit to Oregon. This is a great opportunity for Dan Lanning and the rest of that crew to bring him in. So I do think it's important to talk about there. Keep our fingers crossed. I do think that the Ducks are going to add a cornerback. I know a lot of people are going to come into the comment section. They've already gotten mad at me because the A.J. Harris conversation. You need another corner. And if you can get a veteran corner who has a lot of, time under their belt, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. Next, we got to talk about the quarterbacks that have entered into the portal and are having strong leaks to the University of Oregon. First, we're going to talk about Husan Longstreet, the former quarterback for the USC Trojans. Now, Longstreet had some run this year, not a ton, getting in some garbage time, but he ends up having 103 yards passing, a touchdown, pretty decent completion percentage as well over 85%, no interceptions, but again, not a ton of reps there, not a ton of he's not going up against Big Ten competition. That's not him going into a starting role. Jaden Maivia, he's been obviously the top guy, right? So you kind of have to take those stats with a grain of salt. Longstreet is a younger player, so the fact that he's hitting into the portal now, that would be the type of guy that you could bring in, whether Dante Moore leaves or stays. Because with a guy like Longstreet, the plan probably would not be for him to play next year or to start next year. The plan would be, let's get him into the system. And I think it's actually a great idea to bring him in and let him go toe-to-toe with Akili Smith Jr. Why is that, Will? Well, because you would have two young quarterbacks that are basically going toe-to-toe for that starting position in probably 2027, right? Well, this is one of those situations where an iron can kind of sharpen iron type of situation, where Longstreet knows that he has to compete with Akili Smith Jr., and Smith Jr. knows he has to compete with Longstreet. So now they're in the film room more. Now they're throwing to their wide receivers more. Now they're going through the plays with offensive coordinator Drew Maringer more. They are learning the system, and they are doing it in a way that is competitive, trying to get the most out of themselves. I think that this would be a home run signing for the Oregon Ducks, because if Longstreet doesn't make it, and doesn't end up being your starter, that means that Akili Smith Jr. is going to be your starter, and that means that he went through some adversity. That means that he earned being a starter in a way that sometimes is more so than just being someone who sits for a couple of years and learns the system from veteran quarterbacks ahead of him. I think this is a great move if the Ducks were able to bring Longstreet in. He's got a good, strong arm. He can clearly run. He's strong. He's physical. I watched some of his highlight tape over at USC. Again, not a lot of plays, but this is a kid that fits into your long-term plan. And here's the thing. If Dante Moore decides to come back next year, which I think we all got our fingers crossed that he will, Longstreet doesn't instantly enter into the portal. He's a guy who knows that next year probably isn't going to be his year to be a starter. Good. Let him learn under Dante Moore. Let Akili Smith Jr. learn under Dante Moore. Let them grow. It takes time. Most quarterbacks, they age like fine wine, or in the case of these kids, cheese, right? Like, it takes time to become a good quarterback. And now you're telling me that I'm going to get him battling it out with another guy who is the same age as him? That's fantastic, because whoever gets that starting job one day, whether it's Akili Smith Jr. or Longstreet, the Ducks are probably going to be in good hands, because you have a guy who's been in the system for a couple of years, but a guy who hasn't just been handed the system, hasn't just been gifted the system. It's a guy who has truly earned what is given to him. And we know that Dan Lanning loves a lot of competition and isn't afraid to call out some of his guys if they are not performing at the level that they need to be. So I love this. I would love to have Longstreet in Eugene. Do you want Longstreet to be a Duck? Yes or no? Let me know down below in the comment section. By the way, hit that subscribe button because we're going to have videos coming out all the frickin' time during the 2026 offseason. You don't want to miss out on any of that. Next, the last player that we're going to talk about is Dylan Raiola. And this is one that I find interesting because early on, as soon as Raiola hits the portal, right? Hey, Raiola's going into the portal. It's Oregon for Raiola. And instantly, we did a video here on the Oregon Football Report. Another reason why you subscribe, because the minute there's breaking news, we're going to get it out to you. But I haven't heard anything else since then. You haven't heard anything else since then. Most of the powers that be haven't heard anything else since then. It almost feels like Dylan Raiola is really waiting on the Dante Moore stuff. But now you're starting to see rumors swirling around on the internet. And in fact, I saw a little bit this kind of floated out potentially from a guy like Pete Thamel that Raiola might be willing to come to Oregon even if Dante Moore comes back. He still has his redshirt year there available. He could learn the system and then take over the exact same way that Dante Moore did from Dylan Gabriel. Now, I don't know if that rumor is true, and I'm not going to be one to necessarily say it's 100% fact because I just frankly don't know. But if Dylan Raiola is willing to come in and sit behind Dante Moore, then he becomes a lot more of an attractive quarterback in my own personal opinion, because he would be the guy who could learn under Dante Moore if Dante Moore decides to come back to Oregon, which I think after that last performance might actually be more likely now. He can sit there and learn. He can learn the system from offensive coordinator Drew Maringer, and he can be ready to hit the ground running in 2027. Now, obviously, the Ducks have some really good young quarterbacks that could step in and help Raiola and help push Raiola, I guess I should say more so. I love the idea of Dylan Raiola being in Eugene and learning the system for an extra year. If he's willing to do that, then he 100% becomes a more attractive candidate to me, because he'd be someone that it doesn't matter if Dante Moore's here or not. And here's the thing, when you look at Raiola's stats, before he gets injured, he's on pace for a pretty darn good year for a team in Nebraska. No offense to, Nebraska Husker fans. They're not as good as Oregon. They don't have the skill players. And I know people are going to give me like comments, oh, what about a running back? Cool. Oregon's got Decorian Moore on the edge. Probably going to have Evan Stewart back next year. Jeremiah McClellan. Those are great targets that you just don't have at Nebraska. So Raiola can get better just simply by osmosis, by being in the room with better talent around him. And in fact, I don't think his year was all that bad. He had an interception problem the year before when he was a freshman. Cut that in half. His interceptions were cut in half. He had 5 more passing touchdowns than the year that he had before. It's pretty damn good. It's pretty damn good. He was on pace to well exceed the passing yards that he had the year before in an offense that it's not air raid. I mean, they're not afraid to throw the football with Matt Rule, but it's not air raid. So when I look at Dylan Raiola, if he is willing to sit behind Dante Moore, then yes, I'm interested. I don't know that I'm interested if he's not willing to sit behind Dante Moore, and I certainly don't know that I'm interested if Dante Moore comes back and he's not willing to sit behind Dante Moore. Because Dante Moore will be the starter next year if he decides to come back to Eugene. So that's just kind of the latest rumors. That's kind of the latest links around the Oregon Ducks, especially at that Oregon quarterback position. Dylan Raiola will be an Oregon Duck in 2026. Agree or disagree? Let me know down below in the comment section. And don't be afraid to sound off. Just be nice. I have sensitive feelings. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in to the show today. I know it was a rough day for a lot of Oregon football fans, myself included, but hopefully tomorrow will be a little bit brighter of a day. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and Sko Ducks.